Hey guys, and welcome back to another podcast. Today we are really fortunate to be joined by Marcus Daniel, a professional tennis player from New Zealand. As you guys will know, Olympic bronze medalist as well, and won about, I think, 5 career ATP titles. So yeah, Marcus, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So I know we're going to have a great chat, which is going to help a lot of the kids and parents watching. So I guess we'll take it back to your background as a junior. So when did you sort of start playing tennis? Where did you grow up?
Grew up in Wairarapa, out on a farm, very rural, and we were lucky enough that out at the farmhouse we had this old concrete tennis court, and my parents played for fun. They played growing up and loved tennis. So in the long summer evenings, they might go out for a hit after work, and I have an older brother and an older sister, and they'd start wanting to join in, and obviously I'd want to do whatever my older brother and sister were doing. So basically, from the age I could walk, I was sort of trailing around after them and dragging a tennis racket around. So yeah, started there, and we moved a little closer to Masterton when I was, I think, 4 to go to school in Masterton, and yeah, started playing a little bit at the Masterton Lawn Tennis Club, and had my first lessons there. I think when I was about 5, and I think I was quite precocious as a kid and quite talented, and I think I got recognized a little bit for that. And yeah, I guess that's where it started. Although I have to say I didn't really take it overly seriously until I was about 15. I was playing a lot of different sports until I was about 15, and then had to choose between soccer and tennis at that age. And when I made that choice, I was like, okay, now I've given up something I love to pursue tennis. I should really, give this a good crack.
Yeah. And was that sort of the time at 15 where you thought professional tennis was a possibility, or then was it still just, I'm going to pick tennis because I enjoy it more?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know enough about the pathway to becoming a successful professional tennis player to really make an informed decision. But all I'd heard was, being a big fish in a small pond like New Zealand, you hear nice things quite often. So I had this perspective that I was really good at tennis, and if I was really good at tennis, then why couldn't I make a living from it? That sort of thing. Um, so yeah, when I chose tennis, there was definitely this idea that, okay, now that I've chosen it, I'm going to be a professional tennis player. Like, there wasn't really any other thoughts in my mind at that stage. And then yeah, I got a really rude shock when I went over to Europe for the first time at age 17 and saw the other kids my age, and was like, oh whoa, I've got a bit of work to do here. But yeah, I guess from the age of 15, I felt like my path was pretty much set.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. And like I know, like Irakovic, listening to her, she said something similar. I think she won all the nationals titles, and her coach was sort of still saying, well, this is New Zealand. Although that's amazing, you've got to go overseas, and then that's the sort of the real test. So, do you have sort of any advice for juniors who are sort of maybe thinking of professional tennis as a possible route? I mean, obviously going overseas is important. As you said, maybe playing multiple sports, at a young age is really important. Is there anything else that you did differently, maybe?
There's a real balance there, in my opinion, and I think there are different ways of going about this. There is, in some cases, an argument for specializing really early. You've got the likes of the Sasha Zverevs and the Nadals and that sort of thing, who are just, generational talents. And then maybe it makes sense to focus in on one sport when you're 10, 11. For the majority of people, I really don't think that's the case. I think kids should have a rounded upbringing. I think burnout is a huge issue, and the majority of tennis players don't make it to futures because they've just had too much tennis before then. And so for me, I'm really grateful for the upbringing I had, for getting my hands on every different type of ball I could, and going surfing and snowboarding, and everything that a kid does for fun if they're not laser focused on professional sport. And I do think there's a bit of sort of cross training that comes into that can benefit. Yeah, I think I think I'm atypical in how many different sports I played until such a late age, but I wouldn't change anything about it.
Yes, and I think it is very common. Just listening to other athletes, like even like Ryan Nelson and Kieran Reid, they sort of say a similar thing. They had like their football and their rugby and their cricket, and it wasn't until like 18 where they had to pick one, and it kind of seemed like whatever one they chose, they'd probably be really good at.
Yeah.
But there's definitely like merit there in not specializing too soon and just avoiding that burnout. So when you're sort of that 15, 16, you sort of just picked tennis. I'd be interested to see what a sort of schedule was like for you, like a weekly schedule, like how much were you training? How many tournaments were you sort of playing at that time?
Right. So when I was 15, I moved up to Auckland to boarding school to try and get more training because to that point, I'd basically just been playing tennis as a summer sport. Like driving over the hill to Palmy North every Wednesday, if I remember right, to go and have my tennis lesson. So I moved up to St. Kitts and I didn't go completely into the academy part of St. Kitts. My parents were always very strict is the wrong word, but they were always, very strong about wanting to have the academic side locked down. So I did the normal St. Kitts school and then trained with the academy as much as I could. So I think a weekly schedule at that point would have been maybe an average of like an hour and a half a day in the weekdays, something like that, an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then playing, the tournaments around New Zealand, I think playing some ITF juniors. And then things, when I went over to Europe, things actually changed drastically. And I sort of understood for the first time what it took, like what hard work in this space really was. And I went from sort of 2 hours a day up to probably an average of around 7 hours a day when I was first over in Europe, and that is too much, I think.
Yeah.
But it really taught me how to work hard and put up with putting myself through hell. I remember the first couple of weeks there, I couldn't straighten my arms. Like I couldn't eat a pizza or whatever because my arms were just so sore. But yeah, so it was really at the age of 15, I probably should have been training more. If I really knew what I was doing in terms of a professional pathway. And then from the age of 17 to about 20, I think I was probably training too much and not thinking enough about longevity with body and injury prevention and, taking care of that side of things.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. So when you were sort of 17 to 20, obviously you said you were overseas. I guess, was that sort of when you were starting to progress into seniors? Because I know that's probably the hardest transition in tennis is becoming a good junior player and then transitioning to get those first ATP points at a, futures or whatever it is. So was that sort of what you were aiming to do around then?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when I first went over to Europe, I was based in Slovakia. I played a couple more junior tournaments over there, and to be fair, I didn't play a huge amount of junior events. I played the ones around sort of Australia, New Zealand, Fiji. I think I went to Asia once or twice, but didn't invest hugely in it. And my opinion, and this might be an unpopular opinion, is it's only worth investing a lot in the junior side of things if you think you've got a really good chance of being top 10 or top 5, because only then do you actually get some carryover into the seniors where you'll probably get a management company help you out. You'll probably get some funding, some sponsorship. You'll get a bit of recognition and a bit of hype. And I'm not sure if this still exists, but I think there was an incentive structure to bring juniors into the pros as wildcards or something like that. Yeah. But if that's not the case, and for me it wasn't the case, I wasn't that good as a junior. It just didn't make sense to travel the world for the whole year with all the costs associated. So when I was 17, I started playing futures for the first time. Again, that was a pretty rude shock. I think I played a couple of futures qualifyings when they had them in New Zealand, and I think I might have got to like last round qualies or maybe qualified once. I didn't get a point while I was in New Zealand, but then going over to the clay in Europe, that's another thing that I think we really need to expose our juniors to early, because clay is just a different beast. It's a different way of playing tennis, and me being a lanky person still, and even lankier when I was 17. I was just like Bambi on ice when I first got onto a clay court. So going and playing futures on clay and trying to figure out how to play against Europeans who had been moving around on the stuff since they were 5. That was really, really tough. But in saying that, given how hard I was training and how much I was putting into tennis, I improved very quickly. And I think I got my first ATP point that year on the hard courts in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously an extremely hard challenge, and a lot of the kids don't understand how difficult it is to get that first sort of ATP point. And obviously, once you sort of get a few, maybe then you get more opportunities and get into more draws, and you can sort of work your way up. But yeah, I definitely know that those first few are really, really difficult. Going into sort of, I guess obviously now you're known as a doubles player, but you did start off playing singles. You sort of got to around, I think, 500 in the world, roughly. What was the sort of, I guess, mindset at that time with singles and doubles? Because you're playing both. You sort of made the top 100 in the doubles, and were playing your singles as well. What was the sort of decision making like when you decided to stop playing singles and focus on the doubles only?
Right. Yeah, just to touch back on that point you made before, that first point that's a watershed moment. Like, I think I cried a little bit when I got my first point, because then you're professionally ranked. Okay, your ranking might be like 2000 or whatever, but it's like you're on the board. You're on the ranking board, and it takes so much to get to that stage. So I'd say that's one of my still like top 10 most memorable moments of my career, was getting that first ATP point, because in some ways it feels like you've sort of made it at that point, like you are a professionally ranked tennis player. And to the decision between singles and doubles, I think probably as a result of how much I pushed my body through those Slovakia years, I really wrecked my back when I was 20, and struggled with it since then. And never in my career did I once play a full season of singles. I was always injured. And it's like trying to run with a big anchor dragging along behind you. Like, taking time off from the tour is it's really detrimental to ranking. So if you can't keep building on top of a ranking, if you constantly have to take time off, it's like 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. And that was still the case. I was playing better and better singles. I think actually that there was a patch of maybe 2 months that really decided this for me. And I just won a futures in singles, and I was main draw. It was rare for me to be main draw of singles of a challenger, but I'd main draw in Canada. So I just won a futures in the UK, and I was main draw in a challenger in Canada the next week. So I had to go straight from after the final, and actually I played singles and doubles finals in that future. Straight from that to Canada and play maybe the next day. I lost the singles, but then that was the first time I played with Artem Sitak in doubles, and we won that challenger in doubles. But what that meant was, so there was a run of 4 challengers. What that meant was I missed the singles qualifying for the next challenger, because they start on Saturday and the doubles finals are either on Saturday or Sunday. And that happened 4 weeks in a row. So Artem and I went deep in doubles, or deep enough that I missed the singles qualies. So at the end of that run, I think, my singles was 500 or so, and my doubles was 120 or something like that. And Artem was really excited about how we were playing and was saying, hey, we need to keep playing challenges together. And so I sort of did that for the last 3 months of that season. I think that was 2014. And same thing happened. I'd play qualies of singles for the first challenger, but then would go deep in the doubles and I'd miss the qualies for the next. So my rankings just organically started separating. And I think at the end of 2014, I was, I don't know, maybe 600 or 700 in singles, and I think either top 100 or close to top 100 in doubles. And Artem said, let's play tour events next year. And so I had this decision of, okay, I could sort of drop back to futures and singles and just keep trying to roll on with the doubles and build my singles ranking up, or I could go and play these events that, you know, I dreamed about playing on the doubles side and just focus on that. And ultimately I decided to focus on doubles. It made sense body-wise. It made sense because I felt like I wouldn't have to put my body through the ringer so much, so maybe I wouldn't get injured so much. It was better money. I mean, playing in the lower levels of professional tennis is brutal financially because you've got huge costs and you're really not making much back. So you've got to try and find ways of making ends meet. You know, either you've got to have a really generous federation or a really generous and supportive family, or you've got to find sponsors who will plug the holes. So, you know, I'd been doing everything to try and survive the years, and having this glimpse of, well, maybe I can actually make money from tennis. Like maybe I can put some savings away in the bank if I focus on doubles. That was appealing as well. So yeah, 2015, started focusing on doubles and had a lot of success pretty quickly. Actually, Artem and I won our first tour event that February, so a couple of months later, and that boosted us up and yeah, sort of went from there.
And the great thing about that, it sounds like you would have had that longevity with doubles, so now you're still playing now, where if you focused on singles still, maybe you would have, you know, probably retired by now. And I can definitely relate, like I've got a stress fracture in my back, so it's you know, anything bending your legs and playing at that level is just an absolute nightmare. So I mean, obviously doubles and singles, mostly all the juniors focus on singles, 99%. And quite often when you're selecting sort of, you know, like our Canterbury teams or your Auckland teams or whatever it is, you always pick your best 4 singles players, and the doubles ranking or particular doubles pairings never seem to really, you know, get taken into consideration. So is there a point to be made about juniors specializing in doubles first, or I guess at like 18, maybe choosing to then switch if their games may be suited? Or I know it's a bit of a tricky question, but I'm just interested to hear your thoughts.
I think you'd have to, yeah, before a certain age, I don't think there's any point to it. I think people have to be good tennis players first and foremost. Like, there are very, very few successful doubles players who aren't good tennis players. I mean, the guy who pops to mind, and I'm sorry, Jamie, but Jamie Murray is not a good tennis player, but he's a phenomenal doubles player. But I don't think you can teach that. So I think, yeah, getting a good base and get a good fundamentals on a singles court, and then maybe, yeah, when you're more mature bodily and you can play a more serve volley style and play a more aggressive, you know, covering the net style, then maybe if people are suited to that, then focusing more on doubles is smart. The other thing, I think too much emphasis is put on ground strokes as juniors. I think there should be a bit more of an all-round approach, because I could be wrong here, but the way I see tennis going is a more all-round game. I see more and more people taking their opportunities to come forward and being really aggressive on the short balls. I mean, even people that you think of as grinders like Rafa Nadal, if there's a short ball, he is all over it, and he's got phenomenal volleys. He's a great volleyer. He doesn't get known for it, but you know, give him a ball at the net and he's finishing it more often than not. So yeah, I think there could be more focus on the sort of front of court play as juniors, but doubles specialization too early, I don't think so.
Well, that's the thing. Like a lot of the kids maybe who look at the rankings now in the doubles and they'll see these names and they'll think they're just doubles specialists. But like on top of my head, like Dodik, Rajiv Ram, like they played singles at a high level. I think Dodik was like top 30, beating Nadal and Canada, if I'm right. So that a lot of those players do actually, you know, as you said, they're really good singles players. And yeah, going into sort of now, I guess, professional sort of tennis at that higher level. So with all the travel, going hotel to hotel, you know, jet lag, all that stuff, what sort of, I guess, the trickiest part of living on the tour for you?
The trickiest parts are all the travel. Travel gets exhausting. I envy people who get excited about flying and going someplace, because Airports are my least favorite place in the world. Hotel rooms are sterile and you miss home. I developed over my career some weird little things that sort of, I'd get into a hotel room and completely unpack everything and try and, hide my suitcase. And I love good coffee. So I like travel a little coffee making kit and just little things to try and make a hotel room feel a little bit more like a home, but it's not. So that gets hard. And then the other part is coming from New Zealand, it's very difficult to get home. And I really envy European tennis players because 20 weeks of the year, they can pop home if they lose early or, like drive to a tournament. I mean, there's one ATP event in New Zealand a year, and that's amazing. It's amazing to play at home, but then the rest of the year we're away. So the tennis tour is not easy. It requires a huge amount of sacrifice, and it's hard on relationships. So there has to be a burning desire to succeed and to compete, to handle it. And I'd say actually the unglamorous realities of the tennis tour are what end most careers at the lower levels. And yeah, that's actually, that's sort of what I'm personally dealing with now is understanding the sacrifices that are required and, trying to take some time to rebuild that desire and that fire to be a match for the sacrifices. Because, being stuck outside your country for a couple of years just adds on top of those sacrifices and makes them a little more poignant.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is as you get older into your career, like I know players like John Isner, like they're lowering their tournament schedule now to sort of balance it out. I think he's got 3 kids, so he's sort of balancing his desire to play tennis and lots of tournaments, and then he can just sort of go home. But again, as you said, he lives in America, and that's much easier to do. Going back to New Zealand, obviously, is like a big commitment. So as well, I mean, with sort of jet lag and court conditions, because this is something, again, as someone watching on TV, we don't really see. So from players traveling tournament to tournament all the time, especially if you're going into different continents, how hard is it to, I guess, play at your best with jet lag and different court conditions? Because I know, like last week at Indian Wells, they used those pen balls, and the conditions are so super different. Where this week in Miami, it's Dunlop balls, and the courts seem a lot faster. So how hard is it to play your best tennis while dealing with all the travel and the jet lag?
I guess it's not something I think about too often because you just have to do it. I mean, you can. There are little hacks to trying to be better prepared. Like, I spent a bit of time learning about. I forget what it was called, but like flying. I forget which is which, but phase delaying is easier than phase advancing. So flying to a place where essentially you just have to stay awake for an extra few hours and wake up later. That's a lot easier than trying to convince your system to shut down and go to sleep. So playing around with things like melatonin, like if you lose, then like 2 days before you fly, taking some melatonin at the time that you want to be going to sleep in the place that you're flying to, just to like try and get your circadian rhythms going right. So there are little ways of trying to overcome the worst of jet lag. But it's just there, like it's just a reality of the tour, and coffee is good if you're playing late at night and you're really jet lagged. But everyone's dealing with it, and in terms of court conditions, yeah, it can be difficult. Actually, I think the balls are harder, and that's not great from the ATP having 2 different balls in one swing in one country, and it's always a fight between the ATP and the players wanting conditions that are as good as possible for them, but then sponsorship and, the tournaments being businesses that have to stay afloat. So, maybe Dunlop made a better offer than Penn for the Miami tournament. But yeah, using different balls in different conditions, that's hard on the body, hard on the arm, especially going from, for example, hot into cold. Cold balls just are a lot heavier and a lot harder on the arm. I think over a career, you learn to listen to your body. And this is actually probably the most valuable learning that I've had, is listening to that little voice that says, okay, you've probably had enough. I think it's a personal thing for me, and I think it's probably actually a cultural thing for Kiwis. Like, just, put your head down and keep working and don't complain. But I think this acknowledgement of, like, actually, I feel like something's a little off in my body, and listening to that voice, not being soft on yourself, but just being like, okay, it's probably going to start being detrimental for me to keep hitting balls at this stage. That sort of thing, when you're dealing with new court conditions or new balls. It took me a long time and a lot of screwing my body up to learn it, but finally I've learned it, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I just know, if you're hitting on hard courts with some Wilson balls, and then the next week you're playing, even at, like, in New Zealand, I mean, at a different tennis club with Dunlop balls, like, already then you're completely out of rhythm. So I can only imagine how hard it is for players and doing it every week on the tour. But obviously they're better tennis players than me, so they're easier to adapt. Going on to sort of, I guess, I know, like, a lot of kids that play tournaments, they'll be interested in the social aspect of a tournament. So, like, the tournament lounge, interacting with other players. Is there sort of particular players that you spend time with? What do you do between matches? Do you sort of hang out with your team, or do you play cards with other players? Do you have some sort of, best mates, I guess, hang out with?
Yeah, so the cool thing about the double side is I feel like it has a lot more camaraderie than the single side. And I think that's because a lot of doubles players have played with each other in the past, or, we all practice with each other all the time. So even though there's that obvious sort of adversarial piece to any competitive environment, there's a bit more sort of collaboration or friendship or something. So, like, we'll all have lunch together, we'll sit in big groups. And I find on the single side, it's more split in languages. So, like, the Spanish speaking players will hang together more, and the French speaking players will hang together more, and that sort of thing. On the doubles, it's a bit more mixed, which I really like. And yeah, there's a bit of cards and that sort of stuff. Usually the tournament lounges put a bit of effort into having some sort of entertainment, whether that's, like, the shooting little basketball games or ping pong. Tennis players love ping pong. It gets pretty heated on the ping pong table. But the other side, I'd say, is if people are at the tournament and in the player lounge, that's generally because they've either got practice or they've got a match. And when people are in the mode around practice or matches, it's like rest is serious, like conserving energy is serious. So there'll be a bit of sort of easy chat and easy banter. And, if they want to relax a little bit, maybe they'll play a game, but it's all pointed towards performance. So in that sense, I think it differs a bit from junior player lounges, where it's more sort of having fun and then go and play a tennis match, rather than, doing the stuff in the player lounge that is going to be positive for the tennis match or for your practice. So it's still social, but it's almost like social with a purpose, if that makes sense.
No, I know what you mean. It's because obviously as well, it takes your mind off the match, which can be a positive. You're not burning yourself out playing cards. So I think that's definitely a positive. And interesting, comments about the doubles. I think only from an outsider, but you quite often see when, doubles players shake hands, there seems to be a bit more humor and, like, great match and lots of respect, because probably they've played each other so many times. So when the singles, you can get some obviously different handshakes and stuff like that. So definitely really interesting. And just the last sort of comment on the doubles before I get onto the Olympics. How hard is it to sort of find a doubles partner? Because I know with obviously Michael Venus, and when he played with Piers, they seem to be quite similar in how they played. It didn't really work, and then he seems to play better maybe with a bit more of a consistent baseliner that can sort of do opposites attract sort of thing. So how hard is it to find a good doubles partner on tour?
I think it's really hard. Uh, there are a number of things that have to match. So first, you have to be in a similar ranking band. So you've got to be able to get into the tournaments that you want to get into. And that's Mike he's uncommon in that, he was, I think, top 20 when he started playing with Tim, and Tim was probably like
30,
40 or outside top 50 or something like that. Actually, no, yeah. So when Mike decided to play with Tim, I think Tim was ranked like 50. And then in the month between that decision and them actually playing together, I think Tim won a couple of 250s.
Yeah, because I did some research on him when Michael picked him, and I looked at his results. I was like, oh, this guy's really good.
Yeah, yeah. So then he jumped up, but so that's not common for someone ranked higher to pick someone ranked quite a lot lower. But obviously it's really worked for them. I mean, they've done well. But yeah, so that's one thing. It's got to be in the right ranking band, and that automatically narrows things down. Then the game style has to match, and that narrows things down. And then something that's important to me that's not important to everyone is I have to get along with them. I mean, I spend more time with a doubles partner than I do with my wife, and I want to enjoy that time. I don't want the tour to feel like work all the time. I want to be able to sort of relax and have fun. So yeah, the list is really small. And then narrowing it down even further is timing, because you can't just choose the 10 people who you think might work and then say, hey, let's give it a try, because they're playing with people. And in that sense, it's a little bit like, it feels a little yuck, because if you've lost a partner and you want to try and find someone, you've got to send these messages being like, hey, what are your plans? Like, any chance you want to play together in the future? But if they're in a partnership, it feels a little skeezy, like you're sort of, it's almost like trying to break up a marriage or something, like, so it's a strange situation, and it's often being compared to, like, there should be a Tinder app for doubles partners. But yeah, long story short, it's really difficult.
That's the thing. And as well, if you pick like a good singles player, you're not going to have that consistency of training, and they might do well with you one week, and then the next week they're off doing a different tournament. So yeah, I can imagine how tricky it is. Going into sort of Olympics, obviously you played with Michael Venus and got the bronze medal, which I'm sure would have been one of the best achievements of your career. How's that sort of sunk in yet, and what was your sort of, I guess, feelings after that match point went in your favor?
Yeah, I think it's finally sunk in. I think it sunk in when I could first hand it to my parents in person, which actually was, like a month and a half ago. And it was overwhelming. I mean, so I think, when we were talking earlier, I was saying, I was burnt out from sort of June 2021, which was a couple of months before the Olympics, and needing a break. And so actually for the week before I went to Tokyo, I sort of just had some time out. Like I went to my in-laws' place in Connecticut in the States and just tried to relax and get my head away, because I knew that I was in a pretty bad spot sort of mentally and emotionally, and I really wanted to give the Olympics a good crack. So went over there not in the best headspace, but the Olympics is the Olympics. And when you put on a jersey for your country, it's totally different than when you're out there playing for yourself. So yeah, it was a struggle to get up for the Olympics. And then I think Mike and I, with the help of Christoph, put in as good a preparation as we possibly could have in the lead up. And it was tough. It was such brutal conditions. The heat was insane. Like, especially in the mornings, we'd go out and at 9 o'clock, you'd just be absolutely exhausted after like 15, 20 minutes of training. It's quite hard to describe that sort of heat. But we did the best prep we could. We had really good, vulnerable, open chats about how we could work best together. We had the experience in Rio where we lost an absolute heartbreaker in the first round. We had 2 match points against seeded team. I can't remember what they were seeded.
Canadians, weren't they? Is it
Yeah,
Pottersloo and Nesta or something?
yeah. And they went on to play for bronze. Like, we saw the draw and we thought, if we beat these guys, we've got a good shot of going deep. And lost that, and we wanted to do better. Like, we didn't want that experience again. So I think both on court and also off court, we did the best preparation we could. And then, beating the Colombians in the quarterfinals was a emotional moment for me, because then I knew that for the next 2 matches we were going to play for a medal. And also it was just so tight. That super breaker was, I think I do a pretty good job of bluffing and not looking like I'm that tight, but man, I was so tight in that breaker. And then got crushed in the semis. Disappointed with the performance, but those guys played.
They were unbelievable that day.
Yeah. And then, I mean, so we went straight on the practice court after that semis and spent like 2 hours going over what we could do better the next day, and how we could not have a repeat. And I think that again was probably the reason why we played well in the bronze medal match. And again, super tight at moments in the bronze, and it was overwhelming. I was crying for like 20 minutes after that, and it was just this whole, not only the fact that we'd won a medal, and both of us are just, the Olympics means so much to us, and playing for the country means so much to us, but also this build up that I'd had where I was just so exhausted mentally. And, earlier my partner had just split with me the month before the Olympics. So I knew that I'd have to go through this process of trying to like play with someone, like find someone to play with. And so it was just this whole thing came together, and I was just like, I was overwhelmed. And
it must have been pretty cool as well to have all the other New Zealand athletes there, because obviously you said initially it was quite hard to get up for the Olympics, but once you get in that environment, was that easier to help motivate you? And then was there anything you sort of, I guess, learnt from them, or any good stories?
The New Zealand team does the most incredible job at the Olympics. It's outstanding. Not only the athletes themselves and the vibe that they bring, but the support staff are just the most incredible humans. And they're just always super positive and super supportive. They work harder than anyone at the Olympics. And the thing that I always find amazing is the amount of culture they manage to bring with them to the Olympics. So, when we arrive, there's a haka to welcome you. And that's, especially if you've been away from home for a while, that's just absolute goosebumps. I mean, hakas are goosebumps at any moment, but when you've been away from the New Zealand culture and you come into this Olympic environment and you're greeted with that, it's just, it's very special. And we have these punamu necklaces, medallions that, they're carved from one piece of stone. The idea that we're one team, we're in this together. And then we got welcomed back again after the medal the next day, because actually it was really late at night when we got back. But the next day we got a welcome with it was me, Mike, and Christoph, and then Dylan Schmidt and his coach, the trampolinist. And I don't know, there were maybe like 60 to 80 people doing a haka for that. And I started crying again, like the amount of energy and power and something like that is phenomenal. I mean, definitely that winning that medal, definitely the peak moment of my career.
And just the impact as well that it has on New Zealand people, like a lot of tennis players and even people that, if you're from other sports that don't watch tennis like religiously like I do, they were suddenly like really interested in so I'm sure it did get a lot of people into tennis and maybe knowing doubles for the first time and that sort of thing. So I think that's really cool, and hopefully inspires the next generation. As we go into the last few minutes, I'll just ask a quick Q&A just from some of the kids that asked questions at coaching the last few days. So the first one was, and this isn't your best win, but what is your best match you've ever played, if you remember, like your individual performance? Is there one that stands out, or?
You know what? Two come to mind, and they were back to back. The first quarterfinal of a slam I made was at the Australian Open, and in the third round, I played an incredible match on, I think it was 1573 Arena in Melbourne, where I think I'd been to the third round a bunch of times and I'd never made quarters, and I was just ready, and everything worked. Like, I was doing these ridiculous reflexes, and I mean, the opponents were looking at me like, like what? And then actually the next match in the quarterfinals, I played another great match, and we lost 7-5 in the third set tiebreaker to the guys who won it. So it was a loss, but yeah, those two matches I remember being particularly on.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. Second one was, who's, like, I guess the biggest player name you've ever played against?
Djokovic, and we beat him.
Oh, awesome. There you go. You can always say that. Another one is, anything you would do differently in your career?
Yes. Yeah. Looking back, I would have gone to college in the States. For two reasons. One, I wasn't physically ready for the tour. And I wonder if I'd gone to college, if I would have avoided this back injury that's, I think led to all of the other injuries. And two, I think this, the match fitness that you get in college, if provided you go to the right college, the sort of place where you're not going to get swept into the, like a party environment or that sort of thing, a place that's really geared towards funneling tennis players through college to a professional career, because I think there's a spectrum there. But yeah, that's the biggest change I make is going to college and maturing physically.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's a really good answer. And final one from me, you can just answer this one quickly, is how do you play well under pressure? Like in a tie-break situation, like I'm just thinking about that Olympics match. Now, you've had lots of tie-breaks, and I've seen, Mike Venus do it as well, as, clutching those serves and those volleys in those pressure moments.
I think everyone has to develop their own routine, but for me, the thing that's worked the most has been acknowledging nervousness. So just saying this is normal. Like, everyone gets tight. Everyone. If you don't get tight, you don't care. And you don't get to a high level if you don't care. So it's like, okay, yes, I'm nervous. That's okay. That's normal. Now, what tools do I have? What can I use in this moment to go through the nervousness? And often that means, what's my favorite shot? What's my favorite serve to hit in this moment? That sort of thing. So like accepting nerves, and then, okay, what are my tools? And the third thing that I found really useful, which is a little bit more subjective, is this idea of empty mind. And that's what I was constantly telling myself during the bronze medal match, was just empty, empty, empty. And that's a lot easier said than done. But the biggest mistake you can make in tennis, especially in tennis, because you can't run the clock down, is thinking in the future. Thinking like, oh, what if I beat this guy? Like, oh my God, imagine being able to tell my friends that I've beaten this guy, or, that sort of thing. So focusing on emptiness and just like the moment, or focusing on the feel of the soles of your feet, like how do your feet feel in your shoes? Something that's really present moment and just not related to results or like the people watching or that sort of thing. I found that really useful in pressure moments too.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really good answer. And that's, I'm glad you said that, because that's really similar to what our sort of mindset coach says on the calls, is sort of just blocking out all that additional noise. But exact same thing. You can't actually just push the nerves away and the pressure away. You've actually just got to accept that and acknowledge it, and maybe have a routine that can keep you focused on that, and picking that particular shot, first serve wide or whatever it is, just keeps you in check. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. And I'll hope to see you in Melbourne, because I've already booked tickets. So so I'll make sure to try and get to your first round match there, hoping you're healthy and there anyway. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It was a really interesting chat. I love reliving some of those moments, and yeah, interesting digging into some of this stuff. So cheers.